Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Alaska Collaborative on Health and the Environment teleconference with investigative journalist Carey Gillam about her expose of Monsanto and the health harm of glyphosate, which she details in her award-winning book, Whitewash, the story of a weed killer, cancer, and the corruption of science. My name is Diana DeFazio, and on behalf of Alaska Community Action on Toxics, I'll be facilitating today's call. CHE Alaska is a regional partnership group of the National Collaborative on Health and the Environment. CHE Alaska aims to advance knowledge and effective action to address growing concerns about the links between human health and environmental factors. You can find more information at akaction.org and healthandenvironment.org. Everyone who signed up for the call should have received an email from me with a link to the presentation. If you signed up late and didn't get the email, you can find the link on our website homepage at www.akaction.org. And Carey Gillam will be saying next slide and periodically letting us know which slide number we're on to help us all follow along, because you'll need to click through that document to follow along. During the last 15 minutes of the call, we'll invite participants to ask questions or make comments. So you might be thinking about what you would like to discuss during that time as Carey goes through her presentation. This year, we have hosted a series of calls with investigative journalists writing about environmental health concerns. You can find podcasts of those calls, as well as over 100 others, on our website at akaction.org. And now it is my pleasure to welcome and introduce our featured presenter. Carey Gillam is a veteran investigative journalist, researcher, and writer with more than 25 years of experience covering corporate news, including 17 years as a senior correspondent for Reuters International News Service. She has specialty knowledge regarding the rise of biotech crop technology and associated rise in pervasive pesticide use in our farming and food production system. Gillam works now both as a writer and researcher on food and chemical policy issues and directs research for the nonprofit consumer group U.S. Right to Know. Gillam has won several industry awards for her work and been recognized as one of the top journalists in the country covering food and agriculture. Her new book, Whitewash, the story of a weed killer, cancer, and the corruption of science, was released in October 2017 and won the coveted Rachel Carson Book Award from the Society of Environmental Journalists. Welcome, Carey. You may go ahead and begin.
Thank you. Thank you for that nice introduction. Hopefully you can hear me just fine. So I like to always say before I give these presentations, I have been a journalist, for all of my adult professional life, about 30 years now. What that means is I'm not really good at PowerPoint. I'm not trained and very polished in presentations. But what I've really been to do, of course, is put aside my own opinions, avoid biases, and just pursue the truth. Dig in and find the facts and try to bring those to light. And that's, really what's brought me to where we are today with this presentation and with the book Whitewash. For the last 20 years, I've spent my career researching and reporting on food and agriculture. And what I found, when I began that endeavor in 1998, I didn't really know much about it. Wasn't worried about pesticides in my food. Certainly didn't have any fears about, GMOs or Monsanto or Dow or DuPont. But where I am now and all of the research that I've done over these years makes it really abundantly clear to me that we have a profound problem. We've created this, a pesticide-dependent food system, and it's putting our kids, our future generations, in danger. Health experts around the world recognize that these pesticides are a big contributor to a range of health problems suffered by people. And what I've seen, and what you can see in the literature, is that these scientists are trying to make clear to us that there are so many risks. But a handful of really powerful and influential corporations convinced our policymakers that these risks to human and environmental health are outweighed by the rewards, that these chemicals bring in fighting weeds or bugs or plants. Plant diseases and that sort of thing. And we've seen these corporations consolidating. They're becoming more powerful. And at the same time, the data shows us they're pushing higher and higher levels of dangerous pesticides into our foods, into our water. So I'm going to talk about this today. And we'll move on. Let's see, slide 2. I decided to start putting this into my presentation because I've had people come to me and say, a weed killer is not a pesticide. And so I want to make clear, what is a pesticide? A pesticide for legal and regulatory purposes is, a pesticide, anything that kills weeds, a fungicide, a rodenticide, anything that acts in that way to prevent or destroy or mitigate against pests, including weeds, would be considered a pesticide. So when I use that term, that's what I'm referring to. And we can go to slide 3. So these are what I call some not so fun facts. Over 1 billion pounds of pesticide are used in the United States each year, approximately 5.6 billion pounds worldwide. About 50 million Americans are getting drinking water from groundwater potentially contaminated with pesticides and other ag chemicals. These chemicals, I'm sure you're familiar with the term glyphosate, the world's most widely used weed killer, and the one in Monsanto's Roundup, and the one I focus on in my book, Whitewash. But this and other pesticides are tied to, cancers, liver and kidney diseases, reproductive problems, neurodevelopmental harms. Our director of our National Institute for Environmental Health Sciences, this woman, Linda Birnbaum, she's probably one of the top toxicologists in the world. And she has been one of those trying to raise alarm bells and say, these pesticides and other chemicals are causing serious health problems at levels that we previously thought were safe. We thought we were okay. And she's trying to raise the alarm and say we're not. I also show you here a quote from Chuck Benbrook, who's been tracking the rise specifically of herbicides. He has a very dire prediction, a public health train wreck, because we are allowing just unchecked, unmitigated use, specifically of herbicides in particular right now. If we can move on to slide 4. These are just, again, some statistics. It's shocking to me, 39% of men and women in the U.S. are expected to be diagnosed with cancer in their lifetimes. That's 1 in every 2 men and 1 in every 3 women is how the data breaks down. And that, I think if people who are on the line think about in their circles, their families, their friends, do you know people who have cancer, who have died from cancer? I bet everybody on the call does. And is that okay? I mean, we continue to be told, to live with cancer and pop a pill and have chemotherapy and chop off body parts. And, I think we need to be thinking about how to reduce cancer in the first place rather than live with it and deal with it. And our National Toxicology Program said the very same thing in a 2016 report. It's not enough to learn to live with cancer. We should be trying to figure out what we're doing to cause it in the first place. So let's move to slide 5. And again, so this is the focus of my book. It looks at pervasive pesticide use across a wide range of chemicals, but glyphosate or Roundup is sort of the main thread, the poster child for the pesticide problem, in my view. Glyphosate, as I said, is the active ingredient in Roundup, as well as hundreds of other products that are sold around the world to kill weeds. It's the most widely used agrochemical in history. Glyphosate represents about 25% of the herbicides sold around the world. It's worth billions and billions of dollars to Monsanto, to Monsanto's new owner, Bayer, and then to a number of other very big companies around the world. So it's very controversial. I'm sure you've heard about it. We'll move on to slide 6. There are now well over 8,000 plaintiffs who are suing Monsanto, alleging that these glyphosate-based formulations like Roundup and Ranger Prep caused them or their loved ones to develop non-Hodgkin lymphoma. And importantly, they're also alleging that Monsanto has known, and has covered up the risks. I'm sure you saw the news. The first trial in San Francisco ended in a $289 million jury verdict for the plaintiff, a guy named Lee Johnson, a 46-year-old father who worked for a school district and sprayed school grounds on a regular basis with these products, and was exposed pretty dramatically. There were a couple of accidents and spills where he was drenched in the chemicals. and he is not expected to live very much longer. Actually, today, there's a hearing in court in San Francisco because Monsanto has asked the judge to order a new trial and or to set aside the verdict. So probably right now as we're speaking, they're starting to take that up, and it'll be interesting to see what happens. Notably, the jury in that case found that Monsanto acted with malice in failing to warn, which is why part of the reason why there was such a large jury verdict. We can move to slide 7. All of these lawsuits came out after this classification in 2015, March of 2015. This was the World Health Organization's cancer experts, the International Agency for Research on Cancer. And this group of independent cancer scientists from around the world came together to look at glyphosate as well as some other pesticides. And this is what they do. This is part of their job. They do on a regular basis. They look at well-used substances for which there is some concern about carcinogenicity. And they did this with glyphosate and determined that it was a probable human carcinogen with a specific association to non-Hodgkin lymphoma. And then you get into the interesting stuff. And if you've been following this at all, you know that Monsanto has worked really hard to try to discredit this World Health Organization finding, this International Agency for Research on Cancer classification. They acted with outrage, and they've said that this is junk science and that these scientists are politically motivated, and that Monsanto and its chemical are victims of activists and that sort of thing. But what you see if you look at these internal records, which we have an abundance of them now through FOIAs that I've done and others, and that through discovery documents that Monsanto has turned over in litigation, we really have now a very revelatory volume of information about how hard Monsanto has worked over decades to try to cover up the risks of its product. And part of what they do is what they did to this International Agency of Cancer Scientists. They work really hard to discredit them. So I've just put some emails here. I'm trying to give you a flavor for that. The couple here are 2014. This is before this international group of scientists ever even met. And Monsanto is saying, look, we're concerned. We've long been concerned about this. Glyphosate is on for review. We have vulnerability in the area of epidemiology and exposure and genotox and mode of action. They knew that there was a body of literature out there that showed that this chemical was tied to health problems in humans. And they were worried that this international agency was going to look at it. If you move to slide 9, you see that they predicted almost exactly what they would get. We should assume and prepare for the outcome of a 2B rating, possible human carcinogen, or a 2A, probable. And in fact, the agency did indeed find a 2A rating was warranted. You move to slide 10, you see the natural outcome of that expectation. They decided to plan to orchestrate outcry with this IARC decision. And this is just one page, but there are many pages of this internal Monsanto preparedness and engagement plan. And it really shows, I think, such a deceptive and manipulative effort by Monsanto. What they wanted to do, and they talk about in great detail, is they want to discredit the scientist, but they don't want it to look like it's coming from them. They want it to look like, in addition to their concerns, a whole different range of organizations and individuals and entities are outraged at IARC, and they're planning how to coordinate and basically, set their army in motion to look like there is this authentic, independent outcry against IARC, when in fact, again, the documents show us they planned it before IARC even met. Other things, if you move to the next slide, other things that these internal documents show us, and we've got about 10 million pages of internal Monsanto documents that have been turned over in discovery. Not all of them are public. Monsanto is trying to keep a lot of them under court seal. But things that have come out, as well as things through FOIA, are showing a whole range of things. They show Monsanto public relations teams ghostwriting articles and blogs that will go up on websites and things that look like They've been written by scientists. They'll come under the name and the picture of a scientist when in fact, you see in the documents they were written by, somebody at Ketchum Public Relations, for instance. They provide alternative assessments for studies that indicate harm. They've ghostwritten research papers that assert glyphosate safety for publication. That's been a real problem. There was an example just in the last couple of weeks of a paper that had been sitting out there. It was actually a series of papers defending glyphosate safety and attacking IARC. And I think I might have a later slide on that. I'll have to look for that. But and it was titled An Independent Review of Glyphosate, and it found glyphosate was so safe and that IARC was wrong. But what we see in the documents was it was the furthest thing from independent. Monsanto's chief scientist, Bill Hayden, was writing and rewriting and drafting and changing and trying to figure out who they would call the authors, because of course they didn't want the Monsanto people to be authors, because then it would not look like it was independent. There are contracts where it shows them directly paying these supposedly independent scientists to do, to have their names on this paper. It's deceptive. There's no other explanation for it. If you move here, let's see, I'm on slide 12 now. This was a judge's decision in looking at this. He said the internal correspondence could support a jury finding that Monsanto has long been aware of the risks, but has continuously sought to influence the scientific literature to prevent its internal concerns from reaching the public sphere. That was before the trial. This was the judge just taking a look at these documents and saying, yeah, it looks like Monsanto has been hiding stuff. And indeed, that's what the jury found. If you move on, let's see, chat, this is slide 13. Oh, this is one of the emails where Monsanto talks about ghostwriting. They're referring here to what they intend to do with these new papers, and they're saying, if you recall, this is what we did in the year 2000. There was a paper published in the year 2000, William Crows and Monroe, that regulators around the world have relied on to certify and to understand that glyphosate is safe. We didn't know that it was ghostwritten by Monsanto. These papers came out until we see Monsanto talking about how they ghostwrote that very critical paper that was given to regulators in the year 2000. Moving on to slide 14. This is what I was referring to, this critical reviews in toxicology, a review of glyphosate carcinogenic potential by 4 independent expert panels. The documents stated that neither any Monsanto company employees nor any attorneys reviewed any of the expert panel's manuscripts prior to its submission. And then you see just one little hint here. You see internally, not only are they reviewing, Bill Hayden is saying, I'd already written a draft introduction. Now I'm going to go back, I'm going to reread it, refresh. Will the author be you or Gary? There are pages and pages and pages of these sorts of things where internal Monsanto employees are manipulating what is supposed to be an internal, or it's supposed to be an independent series of papers in a journal. And the editors for this journal and the publisher, Taylor and Francis, did finally come out just recently and issue an expression of concern and require that these papers have a clarification and additions to their acknowledgments, but they haven't retracted them. And they're still allowing them to sit out there and call them independent papers, which is so threatening, because how can we know what is real and what isn't real in our medical and our public health journals when these sorts of things are allowed to persist? Slide 15, more types of ghostwriting. I think I touched on some of this. PR agents write articles that appear in magazines and websites. We also have seen where Monsanto and its PR agents will assign what they call policy briefs to professors at universities around the country when they want them to write something that is going to help support a policy agenda that's going to benefit the chemical industry. And they assign these academics these papers to write, tell them basically what to say. Here are the talking points. Here's what we'd like you to include. Once you turn that in, give it to us, and then we'll get it out there in publication. And that's what we've seen. Again, these things are designed to look like they're authentic, they're independent, they're coming straight from sort of the knowledge base and the hearts and minds of professors around the country. When the documents show us they're being directed by the chemical industry. You move to slide 16, you'll see what we call front groups that the documents have laid out for us. Monsanto refers to these first four as partners in internal memos where they're talking about how to manipulate public perception and how to discredit certain scientists. They want to do it through these organizations: Academics Review, Genetic Literacy Project, Sense About Science, Biofortified. They talk about these groups as I said, as partners, even though many of the groups will say, oh, we're not partners, we're completely independent. American Council on Science and Health is another one, ACSH. We have really interesting internal documents showing them basically begging for more money. You know, you've given us a lot of money in the past, Monsanto. We want you to keep doing it. We need more. And remember how much we're helping you by defending glyphosate and all these products, even while we're saying that we're independent of you. Again, it's deceptive. Slide 17. This is beating a dead horse, I suppose, with the evidence of deceptive tactics, but this is Academics Review, which again, you know, purports to be independent, but we see in the internal documents that it was basically established and set up by Monsanto officials who wanted to set up a website, an organization that would weigh in on matters that pertain to Monsanto's business lines, and they would look like they were independent. You see in this email, it says the problem is one of expert engagement that could be solved by paying experts. The key will be keeping Monsanto in the background so as not to harm the credibility of the information. And again, this is just one little snippet of a long and very detailed discussions about how to do this. Academics Review has been very instrumental in trying to harass and discredit journalists and scientists. They've written at least 2, maybe more, very negative blog items or articles about me, Carey Gillam. They never said that they were set up and got money from Monsanto when they write about me and other people. But it's designed, again, to try to push forward the agenda of the chemical industry while confusing consumers. Moving on, what slide is this? 18. So, this is the American Council on Science and Health claiming to be independent of Monsanto. This is just a snippet of the email chain from February 2015, showing ACSH asking for more Monsanto funding, promising to help work to discredit international cancer scientists. You will not get a better value for your dollar than ACSH. This is from Monsanto's Dan Goldstein. All right, moving on. Slide 19. Sorry, I'm an author. I keep thinking chapters. Slide 19. So what happens here is you see that through all of this, these years and years and years of messaging about the safety and the hiding of the risks, what you see is that the agricultural use of glyphosate, as well as residential and other uses, has really just exploded. And we track from the 1990s until the mid-2000s. This is a bit of an old slide, but what the numbers tell us is that glyphosate use has just gone from about 123 million pounds a year globally to 1.8 billion pounds a year now. And that's again, crazy. To think that we are so awash in this pesticide that's been linked to cancer, reproductive problems, as well as a host of environmental problems, biodiversity issues, soil health problems. If you move to slide 20, this widespread use of glyphosate in agriculture has left residues very commonly now in foods that we eat, that we feed our children. Different organizations, universities and others have documented glyphosate residues in a number of foods. this, I guess I'm getting a little ahead of myself. This is an EPA document that just shows how many different foods glyphosate is used in conjunction with the production of. So a lot of people will think it's just corn and soybeans, but it's actually, avocados and almonds and even with spinach sometimes. Farmers use glyphosate to grow wheat and to grow oats that is used to make oatmeal that you feed your kids sometimes. So it isn't just for row crops. It again is the most widely used agrochemical in history. Now I'm all caught up here. Slide 21. This shows you some of the findings that of glyphosate residues in different food products that people might be surprised about. Cereals and snacks and crackers and things like that are very commonly consumed. Slide 22. This is a piece I did a couple of years ago. The FDA, which has been doing some unofficial and official sampling, they just finally started it in 2016, looking for glyphosate residues in foods, found it very widely in honey samples, organic honey, as well as non-organic honey. This particular story caused quite a snowball of events and effects, and the poor honey industry, many players got sued. It's created a lot of problems. But again, people wouldn't necessarily think about it, or didn't until we started to get some data on that. But yes, we should expect to find this weed killer in honey. If you look at slide 23, this testing also confirmed glyphosate residues found in oatmeal, baby food oatmeal products that they have looked at. Slide number 24, this is a little more recent. These are all things that I have found out not because the FDA is telling us, not because the FDA feels that it's important to be transparent with consumers, but because I have filed numerous Freedom of Information requests and have actually sued both the EPA and the FDA when they've refused to turn over documents. So all of these, the oatmeal story, the honey story, and this particular story all came from FOIA documents that I had to fight tooth and nail for. This particular article came about, you can see, let's see if we advance the slide to the next slide. You can see on slide 25 what the chemist, FDA chemist Richard Thompson was saying. I brought wheat crackers, granola, cornmeal from home, and there's a fair amount in all of them. It was basically saying the only thing that he couldn't find glyphosate weed killer in was broccoli. If you move on now to slide 26, this is another example. Even in Brazil, it's not just limited to the United States, of course, but where glyphosate is used, it's also very heavily used in South America. So they're finding it in infant formula, which is not surprising. It's used very heavily in production of soy. You move on then to slide 27. You see sort of estimates on human exposure to this weed killer. This comes from the University of California, San Diego School of Medicine. And they are basically tracking glyphosate residues in human urine. And they found that both the prevalence and the levels of this weed killer have been rising very steadily over the last many, many years here. If you move on then to slide 28, this is a story I probably need to update, I guess, a little bit. This is from 2015, I believe. It always takes a couple of years for the agencies to get their data out. But USDA data showed 85% of foods tested had pesticide residues in them. Our government will tell us that you don't need to worry about those pesticide residues. At 85% is not a big deal because most of that are very small amounts, very, very low trace amounts. But what our scientists are increasingly telling us is that the science that has been used to set what's considered safe and what's not safe has, first of all, been driven by who? The chemical companies. And second, it's been found to be flawed, deeply flawed in many ways. So this is something I'm working on now to pull together a new story on, but we are getting ever more examples of pesticides where our regulators have told us not to worry until it's too late. And then they've come back and said, gosh, I guess we should worry. Chlorpyrifos is one of those, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. At this point, they're still telling us that glyphosate residues in our foods are nothing to worry about. If you move on to slide 27, here I'll talk to you about chlorpyrifos. Chlorpyrifos is an insecticide marketed by Dow Chemical. It's shown very strongly in the science to be neurodevelopmentally damaging to children, and yet it's our fourth most prevalent pesticide found in our foods, according to FDA data. It's been banned from household use. It was supposed to be banned from food, from agricultural use, because it is in our food, because we know it's damaging to children's brains. It was supposed to be banned in 2017, but the Trump administration came in, Dow Chemical and CropLife met with the new administration. Dow slipped $1 million to the Trump inaugural fund, and lo and behold, the ban was put on hold, went away. So we still are using chlorpyrifos to grow food, and our kids are still taking it in. And notably, this is a pesticide, again, that our EPA used to say it was safe in our food. They used to say as long as it's within certain levels, it'll be safe to consume in food. Now they say no. Now if you look in the EPA registration data and documentation on chlorpyrifos, the file, it says no level can be considered safe in food and water. There is no level that can be safe, and yet it's still out there. If you move on to slide 30, you can see here that pediatricians are weighing in on this and saying we're worried about pesticide exposure to children. Children are so vulnerable because, they are still developing their brains and their young bodies. And you can see this pull quote, epidemiologic evidence demonstrates association between early life exposure to pesticides and pediatric cancers, decreased cognitive function, and behavioral problems. We need to get a handle on this stuff. Let's see, did I skip? No, here I am. 31, almost done. Slide number 31. Again, this is from our National Institutes of Health. This is back Linda Birnbaum and some of her other scientists. This is one in a series of papers that they put out, again, trying to raise alarm bells. This was last winter that they put this out. Existing U.S. regulations have not kept pace with the scientific advances, showing that widely used chemicals cause serious health problems at levels previously assumed to be safe. This is the story of our future. This is where we are going next. I firmly believe this story that we've been told, don't worry about these pesticides in your foods. Don't worry about these chemicals. The science is catching up to that false narrative. Slide 32. This is another paper that's come out recently. Study uncovers cause of pesticide exposure in Parkinson's. Again, these authors are finding there's a need to reassess current acceptable levels for these agrochemicals that they were looking at here, paraquat and mannan. More and more evidence is showing us that we need to be concerned about things we've been told we didn't need to be concerned about. Slide 33. Again, you'll see here a warning. This is again something that is more recent that's come out. Study shows that exposures to commonly used glyphosate-based herbicides at doses considered safe are capable of, creating all of this havoc. It talks about modifying the gut microbiota. These findings warrant future studies on potential health effects of glyphosate-based herbicides in early development, such as childhood. I think it's a really powerful message that we are hearing from the science community, and I'm trying to help share that. But there are so many, as I said earlier, so many really powerful voices coming from the chemical industry trying to stifle the scientific warnings. If you go to slide 34, you see I have this quote in my book. I feel very strongly about this. We have a right to know. if having endured much, we have at last asserted our right to know, and if by knowing we have concluded that we are being asked to take senseless and frightening risks, then we should no longer accept the counsel of those who tell us that we must fill our world with poisonous chemicals. We should look about and see what other courses open to us. Rachel Carson told us that decades ago. Seems like we paid attention for a while, but I think we've forgotten that message. If you go to slide 35, this is my little pitch for the book, I guess. It's not a feel-good story, but it's one that has to be told. I have yet to encounter one single person who said, I read your book and it made me so happy, or it made me feel so good. What I hear is, oh, I read your book and, I'm so angry. I'm so frustrated. I don't want to eat food again. So it's definitely not a feel-good story, but I think it is an important one. If you go to slide 36, you'll also see it's a story that Monsanto doesn't want you to read. They actually filed a motion in court in the Johnson trial to exclude my book from being introduced as evidence, which I thought was a wonderful endorsement. So slide 37 is just a thank you, and I will shut up for a minute.
Well, thank you again so much, Carey. We highly value your work and that of the many other investigative journalists who bring these stories forward. And as our June Alaska speaker, Brian Bienkowski of Environmental Health News, reminded us, it's vitally important that individuals and communities come forward with these stories. Oftentimes, that's the only way that they get told, and it's how corporations and regulatory agencies are held more accountable. It's unfortunate that we, the people who are harmed, that the burden of proof is placed on us, but that is how it is right now. And so your work is hugely important to raising public awareness about the fact that corporations and regulatory agencies don't necessarily have our best environmental health interests in mind. So thank you again so much. At this time, we invite our participants to get involved and ask questions of Carey. If you'd like to ask a question, please press *2 to unmute your line. And please also state your name and affiliation. When you're finished, we do ask that you press *2 again to mute your line so we don't end up with a lot of background noise. So this is our time for discussion and questions. And I am sure that we have some people out there.
No questions. I put them all to sleep.
Hi, this is Patty from Anchorage, and I have I guess it's a two-part question. I have read that because insect populations are so quick to become resistant to these pesticides that we're using on our agricultural crops, that from the beginning of one season to the end, they can become resistant to the pesticide, and the companies just say, well, put more on, which doesn't work. And what I've heard is that as a consequence of that phenomenon, we are, despite the fact that we are using billions of pounds of these pesticides worldwide, we are still losing the same amount of crops percentage-wise that they lost in medieval times when they had no such chemical pesticides. And so what I'm wondering is, why is it that farmers don't wise up and come to understand that there's no such thing as winning the war against pests? In terms of using chemicals, it's just not. It hasn't worked. It may work for one season, but it doesn't work longer than that. And farmers are smart. Why don't they get this?
Well, farmers are smart, and I think they're among the smartest, most hardworking people out there. You're correct that the insecticides as well as the herbicides like glyphosate and the insecticides that are used, and the Bt genetically engineered trait that also was developed by Monsanto and is very popular in certain crops. The insects and weeds do develop resistance and have developed resistance. You're right, and the industry answer has been, okay, well, let's use more synthetic pesticides to try to, address this answer. And it's a vicious cycle. When I talk to farmers about this, it seems like there's a short term and there's a long term. If you look at the short term, farmers are just trying to get to the next season, and they're just trying to protect this yield and this production, and they've got loans on their land, and maybe it's just leased land, and we don't have what we did have decades ago, where you have generation after generation farming the same land and really working to protect that land and productivity for generations to come. It's a much more short-term view. A lot of land is owned by, corporate farming organizations. So there's a short-term or long-term view. Those farmers that are looking down the long road are concerned, and they know that it's not sustainable, and they are looking for solutions. And there's a whole movement, at least here in the Midwest, that I've been tracking and following farmers who are working really hard to bring back sort of cover cropping and different crop rotations, and they're experimenting with things like row spacing and to naturally deal with and suppress the risks of insects and disease and weeds. And they're having really good success. But I think when you train your farmers and you market and you push, I mean, we all are subject to advertising, right? I mean, we go out and buy the, whatever cereal because we see it on TV, or, I mean, that's why advertising is such a big thing. And these big chemical companies like Monsanto push and market this stuff everywhere the farmer turns around. When he goes to buy his seed, it's sitting right next to the chemical that the distributor's telling you need to use with the seed, and he's giving you the free hat that's got the name that says Roundup on it, and it's marketing. It's very smart and strategic marketing.
Thank you for your question, Patty. Do we have others out there who would like to ask a question or make a comment?
Hi, this is Elisa Wells.
Hi.
Hi, I'm formerly from Anchorage, but now live in Washington State. And first I want to say thank you for the tremendous presentation. It's really interesting and gives us tons of great information as citizen activists to go to our school districts and towns and other places to try and advocate for this as to why they shouldn't be using these chemicals. But I'm wondering where we find information to give them about alternatives to chemicals, because I know that if I go to my school district and say, look, you shouldn't be using this, they're going to say, yeah, but we have to. We can't have the personnel or the whatever to do it using more natural methods. So hopefully there's some sort of database of practical suggestions we can forward on to these groups.
That is a great, I don't know of a database that has, but there may be one that exists. I know that there are many communities around the United States, well more than 150, that have changed practices, have gotten their school districts and their public parks and things to alter the use of these synthetic pesticides like glyphosate and others. And they're doing it successfully. And they're the experts more. I mean, I know of certain specific products they're using here, they're using there, but I don't know of a database that would list every, option for every different situation. But if you wanted to email me, I could put you in touch with some of the leaders that, are coordinated around the U.S. to do that.
And Alicia, was it?
Alicia, yes.
Yeah. Alicia. You're probably already familiar with the group Washington Toxics Coalition.
Yes, I'm a member of them.
Okay, so hopefully they would have some specific information for your area about what to do.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many.
We don't need to reinvent the wheel here.
Yeah.
There's so many. I just think they're so cool and so innovative strategies that people are employing to deal with these things. And And it's not easy. It's not, it's not, you can't go down to the store and just, and buy it, you stick it on your truck and there you go. It's because we've been trained and conditioned now to support this big industry, these big industries and these big products that make everybody so much money and make us all so sick. But there are options that are out there. And the EPA, I should say, and give them credit, has been moving to try to encourage and accelerate the introduction of what they call biopesticides, that pesticides that are more organic in nature, that are developed without the use of synthetics and the toxic chemicals that we're used to. Because even, our EPA realizes, again, it's not sustainable over the long run. We can't all have cancer. So there are options. I think people are moving in that direction slowly.
Thank you.
This is Margaret from, I'm in Los Angeles now, but I used to live in Indiana. One of the resources that you could look at is the Midwest Pesticide Action Center out of Chicago. They have, they teach people about safer lawn care. And I think they even have it set up so that they teach it to like schools and municipal authorities too. So they've been really active in this area of promoting a safer safer way to do lawn care.
Thank you, Margaret. I'd like to remind people to press *2 to mute their line again when they're done with their question. And I hear someone else piping up.
Hello?
Hello.
Hi, my name is Chad. I'm from Michigan, and I'm curious really about kind of the way a lot of scientific studies are downplayed or completely ignored in whitewash when they don't really go support the proposed narrative. For instance, the agricultural health study, which is one of the most comprehensive studies of relationship between pesticides and cancer, was really downplayed and questioned in a way that really ignores the science in the book. There are studies relating to the presence of glyphosate in breast milk that were completely ignored. So I'm really concerned about the slant of the book and what the science has been ignored.
So would you talk about the agricultural health study? Are you talking about Andreotti, the one that Monsanto is playing up and has been talking about in the court case and all of that? Or are you talking about the agricultural health study is actually an umbrella?
I'm talking about a study that is an umbrella that spans 20-some years, following thousands of people, which show no link between glyphosate and any of these cancers, like non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, etc. Right.
Andreotti, I think, is the one you're referring to. It was released in November.
There was several publications coming out of that.
Yeah. It was. Yeah. So if you're talking about Andreotti, which is what Monsanto talks about quite a lot.
So this is not related to Monsanto. Let's be clear about that. So please stop trying to play up that angle.
So if you're talking about Andreotti, that study was not published until November, I think it was 9th of 2017. The book came out in October of 2017. That study you're right, that was an update to earlier information. It showed that there was no association between glyphosate and non-Hodgkin lymphoma. It did say that there was.
So
it came out in November 9, 2017. It did show that there was an association between glyphosate and acute myeloid leukemia.
That was not statistically significant.
No, but the study authors said that it was concerning and that they thought that there should be further follow-up. So the point that I make in the book and what we've talked about is that there's a mix of science that's come out over the last few decades. Some of it, shows no association, no reason for concern. Some of it shows a lot of reason for concern. The International Agency for Research on Cancer didn't say definitively, hey, this is a slam dunk, we know this causes cancer. They didn't say that. I don't say that. They said it looks like it's a probable human carcinogen. So
but what about other research agencies? There's many others that have come out against IARC's reports.
I don't know of any other independent cancer science agencies that have come out against it at all.
EFSA, German BFR, the EPA.
Those are not independent cancer science agencies. BFR, EFSA, EPA, those are regulatory agencies. And what all of those typically look at, all of those agencies, is they take scientific studies that are presented to them by the registrants. They don't
take into account actual exposure.
I'd like to give other people the opportunity to ask their questions. Carey, do you want to wrap up there?
Sure. I mean, he's hitting, there are probably 12 really, frequently used Monsanto talking points, and he's gotten through about 10 of them. So I applaud that. But what is behind the scenes is you talk about BFR. BFR took information from the Glyphosate task force, which is industry. All of our regulators rely on studies that are presented to them by industry. And what we have found is that industry has been manipulating the scientific record and been less than transparent. And if you look at independent science, which is what IARC did, which is quite different from the regulators, you find a real reason to be concerned.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to some other people who might want to ask a question. We have about 5 minutes remaining.
Hi, I have a question. My name is Celeste. I'm a student here at the University of Anchorage, Alaska. I'm a sociology and psychology student, so it's kind of crazy to see the stuff that plays into it, hearing these conversations. But anyways, so do you think that if America's free market wasn't as prominent, and if our consumer market wasn't as prominent in our culture, do you think it would be a different story that we're talking about right now?
Gosh, I'm not sure I understood. If you said if our consumer market was not as prominent, what did you say?
Okay, so you know how in America our consumer market is a leading thing in our culture. We participate in the consumer market, and no matter what it is, if it's food, if it's clothing, if it's whatever it is. I'm sorry.
I think I understand what you're saying. Perhaps, maybe if I'm wrong, you tell me so. But I do think that in the United States in particular, we're very enamored with wealth and profit and Wall Street, and we want cheap food, and we want it fast, and we want it easy, and we are on that immediate gratification sort of a treadmill. Whereas if you look at places like Europe and places in Australia and others around the country or the world that I've visited, there is a much more precautionary, long-term, protective view of food and health and environment, and so I do think we are different here in the United States, and that leads us, to a place where we endanger our kids and our future.
So if we didn't get to this place, and if we changed if we never even got here, do you feel that, our culture would be healthier? Like we would be more aware, or no? It would be the same?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, I think if there's one thing you have to do is you have to get the money out of Washington, D.C., or we need to do something to get our lawmakers and our regulators more focused on supporting the needs and the interests of individuals as opposed to protecting corporate profits. And you see that, and that's not specific to agriculture or food, that's across the board. I think you can say safely. So as long as our policymakers are endeared to corporate entities more than they are consumers, we're in trouble.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I
think we have time for one more question.
Hi, it's Meg Sears. Hello? Hi. I am in Ontario in Canada, and I chair a group called Prevent Cancer Now. Very quickly, to help out people who are interested in these toxic approaches to lawn care and so on, Ontario has passed a Cosmetic Pesticides Ban Act that's been in place for over 10 years now. If you go to the Ministry of Environment in Ontario website, you will find lists of different lists of chemicals, including the least toxic products that are permitted for lawn care and so on. So that might be something that would be helpful for people who are looking for that kind of information. And now my questions. I'm an environmental health scientist and so on. And two concerns I have to do with glyphosate. One has to do with this, with the microbiome and inflammatory bowel disease, which has been rocketing up in children, and it's particularly high globally in North America. And the other concern I have is glyphosate and its relationship to cadmium in our food. Some of Ben Brooks' research has indicated possibly that organic food is lower in cadmium than glyphosate, and glyphosate can mobilize toxic metals. So there is a plausibility that along with the glyphosate, we're also getting cadmium, which is neurotoxic and carcinogenic, and it's like lead on steroids, actually, chemically. So I'm wondering, Carey, if you're aware of research or efforts to launch research to follow these avenues to do with either inflammatory bowel disease or cadmium in food associated with glyphosate use.
Yeah, thank you. You've done a brilliant job. What I've seen is probably what you've seen, that this seems to be sort of a newer area of research, a newer level of inquiry into possible effects. I don't see science that is nearly as involved in this area, but I certainly am intrigued, and I'm trying to follow it, and see if there really is something there. There's so many concerns about, what this chemical, but others might be doing. I think and with the cadmium, you're referring to glyphosate's ability to be a chelator, I think, and how that might be problematic in that regard. But yeah, I mean, the scientists are definitely taking a look at this. Some of it is more controversial than others. I think it's split the scientific community in certain areas. It's evolving knowledge,
Yeah, well, I'm not so interested in the gory stories as the actual evidence. And
right, yeah.
So far, there's a lot of hypotheses, and I'd love to see some well-designed studies to actually answer some of these questions.
That I agree with you. I think people are talking about it, but I have yet to see any, real weight of scientific evidence on that.
Thank you. I think we are about out of time, but Carey, I just wanted to thank you again so much. And if you have any concluding remarks, if you'd like to suggest a few things that we can do, for example, that you think are the most effective, that would be great.
Oh gosh. Well, I'd say if you're interested in this stuff, I post stuff on Twitter. You could follow me on Twitter. I post a lot of documents that I find, or the FDA pesticide reports and news stories and court documents. If you're interested in the Monsanto litigation, I do maintain a page on the U.S. Right to Know website that I'm trying, I don't know if I'll be able to be successful, but trying to keep up with the federal courts and the state courts and all the different litigation that we're going to get a snowball here in 2019. And we could be looking at, many hundreds of millions of dollars more in damages against Monsanto. Bayer's already taken a hit its share price. I mean, this is a big story that a lot of people are paying attention to, including investors around the world who invest in these companies. So, it's worthwhile to follow that. And again, just, I think knowledge is power. You guys have a lot to tell me, to share with me, to teach me. If you want to email me, Carey@CareyGillam.com. This is, as a journalist, I'm not inventing information myself. I'm learning from others. I'm learning from experts. So I would welcome anything you guys might want to send me. No need to send Monsanto talking points. I've already got those. But anything else would be helpful.
Thank you, Carey. And I've done my best to take some notes during this call. Several participants suggested resources, so I'll be compiling those in an email along with a link to a recording of today's call in case you want to listen again or share with a colleague or friend. So thanks to everyone who participated, and to you, Carey, for your time in preparation and for leaving so much good time for discussion. Our next call, I hope that many of you can join us on Wednesday, November 28th. We will have Lynn Friedman. She's a professor at Columbia University's Mailman School of Public Health, and she holds a holistic approach to public health, which includes consideration of exposures to toxic chemicals and also addresses factors of racism, environmental violence, and intergenerational trauma. So she's looking well beyond the lifestyle choices that some professionals in the public health only look at, to include these other important factors. She will talk about the work that she and her colleagues are doing to transform the way public health work is done and new ways of thinking about the participatory and leadership role that communities must have to truly protect public health. So you'll be receiving an announcement about that call in the next couple of weeks. Again, it will be on Wednesday, November 28th. If you have additional questions or comments, please feel free to contact Alaska Community Action on Toxics by calling us at 907-222-7714. You can also email me, Diana, at akaction.org. And thanks again to everyone. I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.